Ever look at a 335 and say, man, I wish that was a solid body? This model did that. Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. This isn't even the first time Gibson did this weird project, but this is what is known as the 335S. Keep in mind, they dropped the whole electric Spanish thing at the beginning. There is no ES in front because it's a solid-bodied electric guitar. So in a roundabout way, I guess you could say it's kind of like a double-cut Les Paul, similar to the Longhorn that we reviewed not too long ago, but different at the same time because this was first introduced around the year 1980. And they looked like this and were offered in 3 different variations: the Standard, Custom, and Deluxe. The Standard was $499 brand new back then and featured maple construction as well as traditional pickups, which we now call Tim Shaw PAFs. However, for $100 more, the Custom upgraded you to all mahogany construction, gave you the then fairly new Dirty Fingers pickups with a built-in coil split switch, as well as installing a pickguard on it now. But for another $100 premium on top of that is the Deluxe. Yes, that's one of the few times when a Deluxe ranks above a Custom within Gibson's history. But that's when really fancy and gloss finishes get introduced. So we're talking wine red, there's some silver bursts, as well as tobacco sunburst. You get the binding on the neck. Again, it's all mahogany construction. You get the then in style brass nut, mother of pearl peghead veneer, and it keeps the pickguard like the Custom, as well as the same Dirty Fingers with coil splitting technology. But these were introduced as the third brother of the Paul and the SG series, right around the time of their rebrand into the Fire brand. The originals only lasted a few years. However, in 2011, in a limited run, they decided to bring them back very shortly. Now, it's important to note these were not called a reissue. It was just a classic look gets a solid return. The ES goes S for solid tones and ringing sustain. But it's pretty much just a 335S standard reissue because you get the regular PAF style pickups. It's a maple body as well as maple neck construction, so that made it stand out against many other offerings. They did still include the volute, so that's always a nice touch. But you'll see things like no binding, dot inlay, Gibson silkscreen instead of mother of pearl. And you don't have any mini toggles or coil splitting on these. And there's no pickguard either, and it's more of a modified control layout as far as just having 3 knobs versus your typical 4 on an original. But they had an original MSRP of $2,149. However, it didn't copy the Standard's boring finishes. It borrowed it from the Deluxe. You got nice glossy ones in vintage sunburst, as well as a perimeter silver burst, which is very different from what the original silver bursts look like on these. But they also put a little bit of 2011 in here with a Granadillo fretboard. That was the in thing to do at the time, utilizing all these alternative wood choices. A lot of them are just forgotten about. I'm sure many people would mistake this for rosewood if it wasn't for online spec sheets. If what we just talked about interests you as far as checking out an original, I do have this very special potential prototype slash employee style guitar from 1979, which predates the official launch of these, that has some other unique specs to it that didn't end up making it onto the real run. So you can check that video out right here. But if you're curious about the size of this thing, is it the same as a 335 but solid? Nah, it's definitely shrunk down a little bit, but I don't think anybody would want to play a 335 sized complete solid body chunk of a guitar. That would be a little bit too heavy. This is already kind of pushing it with our all maple construction. And that's the great thing about the Henry J era, is they reissued so many cool Norlin era guitars. And rather than just a one-for-one reissue, they always gave it something a little bit different. But I feel they did these vintage sunburst ones perfectly. Like, they even have the burst on the back of the neck and the heel and the body, and including the sides. I mean, this is custom shop treatment here. They did these things very well. So well, in fact, I actually have a funny story behind the 335S. I once bought one that was spray painted blue, but I could see the sunburst finish underneath it, so I painstakingly scraped that all away and made this old video. And then I sold it on, and then it just kept popping up on Reverb. The poor thing was sold 7 times in a year. I actually ended up buying it back to redocument, and thankfully, it finally found a loving home. But if you're curious about how I got this particular one to update our review, because I was wrong about a lot of stuff in my old one, I actually met up with a viewer locally and made this deal. However, that was the same day that I was going to go take my road trip down to Gary's Classic Guitars and then meet up with Steve Howe at his concert to have him sign the back plate and buy those pickups. So I don't really remember much about this deal because I had a lot of stuff going on that day. That was a bit more unique in my brain. But today, we're finally going to get this one cleaned up and go take a look at its parts and specs on the workbench. It certainly got its luster back after a shine, but let's go ahead and check out these pickups. You'll notice that they're zebra bobbin, black and white, but it's a burst bucker 1 in the neck and a burst bucker 2 in the bridge. And those rate 7.98 k ohms in the bridge pickup, neck position at 7.57, in the middle at 3.86. But now for the cavities. Hey, this is fun. An employee was feeling cheeky, VS for vintage sunburst, and then they just put a smiley face in there. If only this was a P90 mounted guitar, because then it would have a double smiley face, but it does have the long neck tenon. But now that I've seen that, that's actually another difference between this and the originals. They did not have a long one. But our bridge pickup cavity is DS. That usually stands for designer series. Then I think they shortened it from 335 to 35, and then they have an S. But 5s and S's can look very similar. But we can definitely confirm that all maple construction. And it's a nice plain grain maple, but you can still see where there's a center seam line, so it appears to be 2 pieces. Now as far as the bridge and tailpiece, just a regular Nashville style one, PW branded, mounted with studs in the body. And then the tailpiece is a full weight advanced bladed incorporated one. But now let's take a second to explore the body. So it's not like a complete flat top. It does have carved edges, and that's where the bursts go. So it cuts in a little bit right there to form the double cutaway shape, but then where your arm might rest when you play, depending on what position, it's got this whole ledge right here until it cuts off about right there. So kind of like a shelf, just not quite as extreme as on a Stratocaster. And all the same things are true on the treble side as well, just to make perfect symmetry. We'll break out our meter here to figure out what our controls are. That one appears to be a volume, likely for your bridge. This one should be the one for your neck. We can confirm, and then this should just be a master tone. As far as the condition of this one, there are a couple of dings right here on the top that I found while polishing. And there's a few other shallow ones down here on the edge. And we can also see some picking marks right here in our clear coat. But moving on from our maple body, we've got that maple neck and our Granadio fretboard. Now in my opinion, I think Granadio is the worst alternative fretboard choice that Gibson did. I used to think that was Richlight, but I've kind of grown accustomed to it and like it now that it's not forced upon us. But Granadio is just kind of a meh wood. It's got a cool name. Reminds me of an armadillo. But the wood grain is just really porous and wide. This particular example even has like a little bit of yellowness to it. I much prefer baked maple out of this era because those are so smooth. And I tend to find Granadio equipped guitars have more issues with fret sprout. So that might just be bad luck on my part, or maybe this wood is a little bit more finicky about moisture because the frets are definitely sprouting a little bit, and somebody might have actually taken care of that and did like a beveled edge, but the edges of the frets, they're kind of sharp. So if you buy this guitar from me and you're kind of finicky about that, you might need to get the ends dressed, just as a fair warning. Now that said about this fretboard choice, I do believe it's the most similar looking and feeling to rosewood though. So if that's what you're after, you're probably going to be okay with Granadio. And you might not like baked maple like I do because it does feel very different. As far as our dot inlays, they're just acrylic. As far as our nut width, I measure 1.67 inches. That increases to 2.08 by the 12. 0.83 first fret neck depth, increasing to 0.98 by the 12, featuring the standard 12-inch fretboard radius and 24 3/4-inch scale. Here's a look at that neck profile. At the first fret and the 12th fret, it's a pretty full feeling C shape. Moving on to the face of the headstock, the truss rod cover on the 2011 version received a slightly more stylistically pleasing version, simply reading 335S, down from all the other wordings on it. But otherwise it's plain, just the decal as we were talking earlier, and Grover tuners this time around. But our truss rod works perfectly, and you can see our maple neck through our finish. And there's a large blemish on our headstock here, right on the edge, a lacquer chip, which was unfortunate. Because these small ones, yeah, I could probably live with that in my collection. But that one made me think, I think I'll wait for a different. There's also another one right here on the back of the headstock. That's a hanger rash chip. And I guess while we're on the topic of major blemishes, somehow somebody scratched this one right there. They must have had a ring on or something. I know it looks like a heel crack, but it's not. That's a clear coat scratch. It's pretty easy to tell that because it continues perfectly straight across where the neck join line begins. But moving on to the back, I've always loved the way these things look, because they just did the full burst job. I think if we saw the current era of Gibson redo these, I bet they would probably go for the highest end version, give it the mahogany body, mahogany neck, and I'm not sure if we would actually get a burst on the back and edges or not. But then again, I don't really see them reissuing the Solid Body 335 anytime soon. But the back is actually different. You do not have the same sculpted edge along it. You do get a comfort cut over on this side of the body though. As far as strap buttons, you got one right here on the base and one at the bottom. As far as your electronics are concerned, it's just regular Gibson branded pots with your toggle switch in here. And you can see through, once again, to the bare maple. And you've got that rectangular output jack. Now the back plate, they definitely over-routed that. There's such a thing as leaving a little bit of a ridge, but that one's just way too much. As far as the rest of the edges, you got a couple of nicks and dings. Nothing too crazy. I'm sure this is still categorized as very good. But I'm the picky guitar collector looking for clean. Because when I bought this, the guy was like, are you going to keep it or not? And it's like, well, we'll see after I clean it. And I think I'm deciding to list this one. There is a sizable ding right here. Then we can run up the backside of the neck. It does have a little bit of flame figuring within it. Not enough to actually call it a figured neck, but enough to be like, okay, it's all right. And that burst job really does hide your volute. That's a much smaller volute than you would actually find on an original, but hey, at least they put it there. But here's the backside of our regular Grover tuners, and our serial number dates it to 2011, 291st day. Secondary batch, nice. Production number 447, wow, they were just pumping out guitars that day. They nearly maxed out the second batch. That's crazy. And then we've got our Made in USA 2011 stamping too. But all said and done, this Maple Beast weighs 8 pounds, 6.3 ounces. It feels way heavier than that though. A lot of the weight is in the body. So let's go ahead, plug it in, and hear how the 2011 version sounds. I don't know about you guys, but I actually find this very tasteful. That neck pickup, very full. But very clear and attacking at the same time. It's not muddy. Same with the bridge. And they play together pretty well. Just like in the clean channel, this thing really just cuts through everything. I bet this would record very well. This is always my go-to test riff for muddy guitars. It's a Death Clock riff. If you can hear this note with the chord, that's how you know it's a really nice clear guitar. So yeah, that means it does stuff like that well and chugginess. So now that we know all about the 2011 335S, what are my final thoughts? I was not expecting this to become a doom monster. This thing really just wants to be tuned low and play chuggy stuff and do some great lead work, because these pickups and this wood combination, whatever it is, it makes it perfect for that. It is ridiculously clean and clear. So if you want a muddy sounding guitar, this is not it. If you want super ice picky, I mean, I guess it depends how you have your amp set up. This probably could get there, but I don't think it's like too obnoxiously bright. But for me, it's the neck profile. It's actually fairly chunky, all things considered. So if you like a slim tapered neck, this might not be for you. So if you were looking for something different, you might try one of these things out. Generally speaking, they're about as expensive as the vintage ones. They'll run you about as much as a used Les Paul Standard. So this probably isn't anybody's first guitar, but as you're going through the Gibson lineup trying to find something unique to have your own identity with, it's certainly something to think about. If you like the kind of weird, obscure models or double cuts in general, I was certainly pleasantly surprised by this. But all right, troglodytes, I hope you enjoyed, and we'll catch you tomorrow on the next one. Take care.